made it to module 5, which is great news because we're over the hump and we're headed downhill. There is so much going on in this class that you're already engaged in. Some of those major assignments are coming due, and it's very important that you focus and absorb as much as you can from those assignments, as well as the material. And so the focus of module 5 is all on diversity. And there's a lot of forms of diversity when we're talking about that. Most people, when we think of diversity, they're thinking, well, we're just probably talking about race, and we're probably talking about different maybe sexual orientations, or just genders, or something like that. But diversity is much more than that. And so from a family life education perspective, we have to look at various forms of diversity. The first thing I want you to consider is the diversity of where family life education might take place. See, there's a really important formula for family life education. You need a building, you need people, and you need the content to teach them. Those are the key elements. And what's interesting is a lot of different places can provide a building, and they can provide people. And so as a family life educator, partnering with certain groups can be something that is so effective to be able to increase family life education. For example, one place that we might partner with are churches. Churches have buildings and they have people. And so that is a wonderful opportunity to have a place to go that will attract an audience that we can teach. The problem is, if you want to call it a problem, is that the church may have some limitations on what we do, who's in control of the meeting, what we can and can't talk about, what topics that they might have maybe some objections to, what would they change about what we say. Understanding that if there were guests there, we may have to adjust what we're doing a little bit to kind of fit with what's happening there. And it's unfortunate that we might have to do that, but if it gets us a huge audience and a building to do it, sometimes it's worth it. Another one to think about are schools. Schools are an excellent government kind of funded building. They exist. Schools have kids. Kids have families. It's easy to bring those families in for family life education, and schools are really interested in teaching. However, there still are limits on what you can teach. For example, human sexuality might be something that is limited in a school. There may be other topics that they want to stay away from, that they don't want to bring in. So partnering with a school is kind of like a church. You may have to adjust to what they're able to allow you to do. The last one that we should consider are businesses. And businesses are great because they have buildings and they have people. In fact, they pay people to be there. And so family life education could really benefit from the setting of the workplace. We're going to have to change things a little bit. We're going to have to alter maybe some of the words that we use. We're going to have to talk about individuals and communication styles that also work in the workplace as well as home. See, this is really easy to do because if you look at the dynamic between parent and child, it's very similar to the dynamic between supervisor and employee. In fact, the same skills that we would suggest for a child talking to their parent is what we would tell an employee talking to their supervisor. And so it's very helpful to try and educate not only on family life, but also on professional life so that they have some buy-in with those things. And that's just going to help give you the credibility that you want and need. And so it's important to be able to engage. Yes, true. When we talk about diversity, we do need to talk about issues like race, ethnicity, structural, socioeconomic status, religion, family form. Those are all what we call structural characteristics. Structural characteristics often cannot be changed, or they're not easily changed. Can't change your race, don't change your ethnicity. It's tough to maybe change your socioeconomic status unless you hit the lottery or something else happens. But the thing that's important to recognize here is that those characteristics may help define things. For example, family form is one of those most important characteristics that we have to be aware of. Are we educating two parents? And if we think about two-parent families, sometimes we think about a house, a white picket fence with a tire swing and a dog and 2.4 kids. And that's not most families. And so sometimes we get step families in with two-parent families, and step families are their own unique animals in some ways. They have some challenges that other families may not have. They may have kids who just don't necessarily want to be part of that family, but that can happen over here. But these people didn't necessarily come into the family. They were kind of thrown into the family. And so there might be some challenges. If we had single parent families, that might be very different from talking about two-parent families and how parenting might be done and what responsibilities are and some of those things. So we have to consider family form. When we consider race, it's important for us to be aware of the power structures that may exist. We have to account for some of those things in society that put people at a disadvantage, that where others might have privilege or the ability to do things, others may be challenged to do the same thing. For example, if we look at race and family life, one of the biggest challenges among African American families is having a father in the home. And so people think, well, we should just throw a father in the home. Well, we have to look at part of the reason why that is. If we look at the structural characteristics and things that are going on in society, more Black men are institutionalized in prisons and jails than other races per capita. We have a higher homicide rate. We have a higher unemployment rate. We have a number of factors that are going on that create a smaller pool of eligible men, and that creates shifts in family dynamics. And so we have to understand how those families might differ and might face additional challenges compared to other families that are formed with other characteristics. And so it's just important for us to be open to the idea that diversity exists, that there may be things in culture that are speaking to us that we have to be aware of. And those structural characteristics are very important, but they aren't the only ones. We also have to consider the process characteristics. And when I think about process characteristics, we're talking about skills that families possess. We're talking about their ability to communicate. How do they communicate? What are those patterns like? We have to talk about culture. We said race and ethnicity, but culture is another thing. Who is able to talk? How are they able to talk? How have things changed over time? And so culture helps define those things. We want to look at power. We want to look at roles that families have. What expectations do they have? What values are they holding? Those are all some of those process characteristics, along with the structural ones that really matter. Let me just mention a few things and then share a couple examples with you. When we're thinking of race, sometimes we like to draw circles around racial groups. This is all Latino or Hispanic Americans. These are all African Americans. These are all Euro Americans or Caucasians. And what we have to recognize is that sometimes there's more diversity in those circles than between circles. For example, two really good examples. One is Asian Americans. I mean, when you're talking about Asian Americans, you're talking about people from Korea, Japan, China, Myanmar, Cambodia. I mean, like the list goes on and on. Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, down into Southeast Asia, Indonesia. So when we say that someone is Asian, wow, there's a lot of languages, a lot of cultures, and a lot of diversity in that group. And just to say they all belong together isn't an effective way of looking at things. Another example might be the Native American populations in America. There are very distinct cultures and practices and languages within Native Americans. And to say, well, they're all Native Americans, they're all the same, ignores the tribal differences, the language differences, the cultural differences, and tries to force people into one big pot. So we want to be cautious about doing that. And we want to be open to some of those challenges. But we have to be honest. We do have to consider race in what we're doing. And we do want to encourage family life educators to be diverse themselves. You know, I am a white male, and if I do education, there are certain groups that I'm not the best person to present in, and I'm not the one who has the most experience with those groups. For example, it would be really stupid of me to try and talk to a group of women about childbirth and to try and tell them what it's like to have a child, because I can't go through that experience and I don't know what it's like. And it might feel insensitive for me to do that. And so if we're going to present something on childbirth, I better have a woman here presenting with me. And that's going to be really important to be able to do, because we need to have people up in front of audiences that represent them. For example, when I worked with the Oklahoma Marriage Initiative, they had 3 programs that were going on. One was kind of a general, kind of open to anyone. They had one that was focused on African Americans and one that was focused on Latino or Hispanic families. And guess what? The presenters in the Latino and Hispanic program were Latino and Hispanic. The presenters in the African American program were African American. When it came to the general program, we had a variety of people presenting, some from these other groups. Why? Because anyone could show up, and we wanted people to feel like someone represented them up front. So it is very important that we look at all of these characteristics and we consider diversity, and that we are open. We ought to be curious with kindness. And what I mean by that is we are interested in how people's experience may be different. And we are interested in a kind way, not in a questioning way. Well, how did you do it in your family? Well, that doesn't sound right. We need to avoid terms like, well, that's the normal way. How did you do it? You know, and suggest that what someone else has done is not the normal way. So it's important that we respect the diversity that we have, that we find ways to fit the buildings and the groups that allow us to present, and find ways to encourage some of those things to happen. Diversity is a strength, and it is something that in a classroom, when we learn about different family lives and different family experiences, diversity is something we want to welcome. We'd love to hear different ways to do it. We'd love to hear input from different groups. Sometimes you might hear something challenging. I remember listening to a parent when we were talking about discipline styles, and one parent said, I just beat my children. I take off my belt and I hit them with it, not the buckle end, but the other end, and they just know it's coming and they'll just do whatever I want. And it's really interesting, because my first instinct was to say, you're doing it wrong, and I want to report you. And I would have lost the relationship. If there were abuse, you're right, I would need to report it. But if there weren't, and it was just a way of disciplining, I have to try and find a way to teach this person to try something different. Not judge them and say, you're a horrible parent, you're terrible, you're using the worst style, your children fear you, here's what the research says, you're going to have a kid who's going to wind up in jail. Instead of saying anything like that, those are all probabilities and statistics. I said simply, well, that's one way to do it. Are there other ways that might be more effective? And then we found some more effective ways. We gave them some tools that they didn't have and allowed them to maybe do something different. So diversity will bring in different approaches, and it'll bring in some challenges and some strengths. So we have to respect it, and we have to get in there, and we have to deal with it. So as you learn a little bit more about diversity, just understand family life education is going to be diverse, and it's going to require you to learn about different groups. And it's not something you can do from a book. And it's not something you can do, hey, I have a friend, and so I know that group. We need to spend time with multiple groups to get to know them, to get to know the norms, to get to know some things that are being done. We need to speak in a way that's inviting, that's not exclusionary. So we avoid words like husband and wife, things like that. We'll use terms like partner or spouse. We tend to talk about things in a way that will tend to promote inclusion rather exclusion. And so as you think about diversity, think about in my lesson, in my curriculum that I'm putting together, how am I thinking about these things? What would it be like if I presented to an immigrant population or older generation or a younger generation? How do things change? Just important to think about as a family life educator so that I'm able to help people in the best way. All right, you got it. So go and start to apply these lessons of diversity in what you're doing.